Episode 1 of Vikings Valhalla begins in 11th century Europe. This is far removed from the tales of Ragnar Lothbrok, who is but a legend at this point. In the 100 years following, Vikings have left their northern homelands and settled across Europe and England. The thing is, this has become a continued threat for the Saxons, who turned to King Ethelred II to find a solution to the Vikings' problem. One of these settlements, near London, happens to be called the Danelaw. It plays host to Prince Harold Sigurdsson, who has decided to leave and head back home. That's probably just as well, because up in London, Ethelred's loyal guards, the Sten, are poisoned, with orders against them, and other Vikings are immediate extermination. Fires rage up and down the coast as men and women are slaughtered, and houses and villages destroyed. It's a bold move, one that's likely to ignite the flames of war. This is later known as the St. Brice's Day Massacre, purging all Viking settlements from the English shores. King Canute of Denmark notices what's happened and sets out on a crusade to exact revenge. Among those who join are siblings Leif and Freydis. We first meet these two characters on the sea as they brave the elements and manage to navigate a frighteningly large wave that threatens to engulf them. They've come from Greenland, braving the open waters and the elements to make it to their destination. This happens to be Kattegat in Norway. Unfortunately, a lot of the ships with heralds have been destroyed, hundreds have been lost, but Harold himself has survived. Now, all of these Vikings have gathered to discuss revenge against the Englishmen. For Leif Erikson, his reasonings are very different. He's looking for someone wearing a cross. It's an English cross, so it seems the only Viking who would wear this is someone from England. The thing is, Freydis is also looking for him. It turns out this man abused her, and he could well be on one of the many ships inbound to Kattegat. Unfortunately, it doesn't take long to find him, a charismatic man by the name of Olaf Haraldsson. Leif and Freydis launch an expedition to track the man down, but unfortunately he makes camp within a large settlement holding an entire army of soldiers. Unfortunately, this makes their mission seem hopeless at this point, unable to gain revenge given the sheer number of Viking brethren among them. Freydis is stubborn, but as she watches from afar, she regrets not taking her chances at the docks, when she could have done. Olaf arrives to see King Canute of Denmark, and tries to strike a bargain. In exchange for knowledge on the English coasts, and how to properly strike them, Olaf suggests a mass conversion given all the pagan tribes are gathered together. This could spark a civil war, but without this knowledge of the English defenses, they'd be hitting a blank. Well, regardless of his knowledge, the king refuses his offer. That night, Canute gathers the Vikings and speaks passionately about the attack in England, urging them to take up arms and strike back. Among those in attendance are the Greenlanders, as Leif starts to question his purpose. Unfortunately, despite working up the crowd and getting them invested in the cause, fighting breaks out between the Christians and pagans. Harold manages to talk them around, giving an impassioned speech about Viking blood and inadvertently undermining Canute's rule. The only one not among them though is Freydis, who sleeps up on the hillside. She's visited by a woman called Estrid Håkon, who tells her she's a long way from home. She encourages Freydis to head towards Kattegat, which Freydis relays on to the other Greenlanders that night. Leif, meanwhile, is confronted by a bunch of Vikings who claim his father wronged them, committing murder. Surrounding him, Leif is forced to fight, but manages to best the warriors, and catching the attention of Harold as a result. He encourages Leif to join him for the glory of battle, needing good ship captains for his cause. Although Leif agrees to think about it, he also dissuades him from Freydis, given he's a Christian, and that's not going to sit well with her. At Kattegat, Freydis sneaks in the main hall during the festivities. With Leif serving as the distraction, intending to let Freydis act, she leaps on Gunnar Magnusson and carves a cross on his chest. It wasn't Olaf after all. Olaf wants punishment and promises to burn the city to the ground unless that occurs. Harold sticks up for Freydis though, encouraging her to show off her scars as proof of what she's had to endure. Although this does sway the crowd a little, it's not quite enough to fully convince them, as she's taken away to a waiter. Episode 2 of Vikings Valhalla begins with Leif and Freydis talking about their fate while in shackles. Freydis feels like justice has been done. For Leif, he's more concerned about their impending death. However, he is proud of her. The pair are eventually brought before the enraged Vikings, frothing at the mouth, and with an enraged Olaf desperate for justice to be done. So naturally, Freydis suggests a trial by combat to settle matters. Olaf scoffs at this notion, pointing out that Gunnar was a valuable asset to their war, and with him gone, they're a man short. Step forward Harold. Sensing an opportunity, he decides to make a case for Leif and force him to fight for the life of Freydis. He's going to have to join their cause now, putting his boating and fighting skills to good use. Freydis is taken back into her cell, while Leif prepares for battle. On Leif's boat, there are tensions between the pagans and Christians, who struggle to see eye to eye. Leif senses this could cause trouble, and demands they all hand over their weapons. Jafgorn is the only one reluctant to do this, but eventually he succumbs, and hands over his axes. Unfortunately, he also has another smaller axe tucked in his cloak he doesn't turn over. Over in England, Eithred arrives at the site formerly known as the Danelaw following the slaughter. A year has passed since then and he declares the place a sanctuary once more. However, his men are worried. Specifically, the rumblings that Viking forces are massing in the north. Of course, the king has started a war, and that is coming right to his doorstep. With Eithred's cough worsening, he sets to work plans to try and pay off the Vikings with gold. That's not going to work though, and instead, Queen Emma enacts alternate plans set into motion to fight them back. Her plan involves sending young Edmund over to Mercia in a bid to enlist Edric Striona and Mercia's aid. She knows this is a risky play, with the throne at stake. There's a chance that Edric could propose alternate terms, but Emma urges Edmund to stand firm and not be drawn into negotiations. As he rides off, the queen's face paints a look of concern. At Tamworth Castle in Mercia, Striona agrees to send 5,000 men and 1,000 horses to help with the cause. However, he believes that the Vikings will attack from the north, and that means they'll go through Mercia first. Emma is of a different opinion, convinced they'll attack from the south, something Edmund is quick to point out. Unfortunately, Striona sees through Edmund's words and believes the king is of ill health. So Edmund decides to play a game of his own, challenging Striona over disobeying the future king. With a wry smile, Striona eventually agrees to send his men forth. On the way back, bells toll in the distance as Edmund implores the men to listen. As they all drop to their knee, they bow to the new king as it signals that his father has passed away. Out at sea, Jarl Gorn believes they're lost, and despite Leif quelling his doubts, a laugh from one of the Christians on board sees him turn and slice the man's neck with his axe. Leif keeps the men in line, killing Jarl Gorn outright. Of course, this causes a fair few concerned looks when Harold and the other Viking ships catch up with them as they manage to make it to the shores of Kent. Harold heads aboard Leif's ship and whispers in his ear, "Viking." Meanwhile, Jarl Håkon grows ever more fond of Freydis. After talking to her out at the market about her past, she hands over Freydis's knife. She decides to send her on to Uppsala to seek out her death. Episode 3 of Vikings Valhalla begins in Kent, with the Vikings raiding a settlement. It's a bloodbath, with a Christian priest killed with a spear, while outside Leif and Harold work together to hold off the troops. Olaf, meanwhile, finds a bunch of women hiding under the floorboards, including the mistress of Kent. On her knees before the bloodied Vikings, she tells them all that Eithred is dead and has been for 10 days. His son Edmund is on the throne, so the attention turns instead to killing Edmund. Edmund continues to skirmish with the various soldiers inside his castle, but of course this is nothing like a proper battle. Given Edmund's arrogance, Godwyn decides to fight him in the courtyard alone, without the tentative soldiers hanging about. Godwyn makes short work of the boy, schooling him and showing how he's not ready to fight the might of the Vikings. "I am not your enemy, your highness, your arrogance is." Meanwhile, Freydis rides for her pilgrimage alongside Yrsa. However, a man approaches and draws his sword swinging at them all. It takes all the group to try and thwart his threat, with Yrsa stabbed and Toke choked out in the process. Freydis jumps on the man's back with string around his neck, squeezing until he dies. It's a harsh, brutal fight, and one that sees Toke killed and Yrsa with a fatal wound. Around the attacker's neck happens to be a cross. This man is a pagan hunter, and with him now dead, Freydis manages to find a healer to look after Yrsa while she continues on to Uppsala. However, other pagan hunters stumble upon their deceased brother, including a man named Care, and set to work trying to find her. With Queen Emma guiding the council, she warns that they're to blame for why the Vikings are there and implore the nobles to be ready, given there's a war coming to their door's top. And wouldn't you know it, the Vikings are already upon them. Marshlands stretch on for as far as the eye can see, and Leif is tasked with leading this exhibition to scout the defenses and see how well the Englishmen are held up. Along their makeshift path, the men hold torches to help light the way. Unfortunately, it turns out to be a trap, and they're soon attacked by archers from the boats nearby. Thankfully, Leif survives and Harold shows up to save him. They've lost 6 good men, but with the king placing his banner down, taunting them, Leif and Harold work together to blend in with the locals and head to the bridge. There, they find villagers with stacks of food, very clearly preparing for a siege. It also gives them a good opportunity to look at the bridge and possible points to attack from. With the Vikings scouting the area well, Edmund decides to take the crown for himself, and in doing so, rests the fate of England in his rather arrogant and misguided hands. As the coronation gets underway, Emma is concerned and believes this is a bad move. Episode 4 of Vikings Valhalla begins with Leif awakening in a sea of dead bodies. As we see flashes of a big battle, we cut back a day before to find the Vikings discussing their upcoming battle. With attack towers and a fortified bridge, Harold suggests they focus on Edmund rather than conquering London. This plan happens to be Leif's, and he intends to exploit the weakness of the drawbridge. They need to be ready when the tide turns, and that means positioning their men accordingly, using boats to destroy the foundations. To make this plan a success, Leif proposes 3 of their best boats be used in his plan, but Olaf scoffs at this idea, while Canute refuses to entertain such a risky idea. At night though, Canute approaches Leif and after talking to him about his motivations, and how he's more concerned with his own men than Canute or the glories of the Vikings, it's enough to convince Canute to go ahead with his plan after all. At the same time, Edmund rides out to see Edric Striona, who bargains with him in order to take on the brunt of the responsibility for the Viking attack. In exchange for joining the fight, Edmund wants Mercia to become an independent nation after this is all done. Instead, Edmund suggests doubling their land. Emma bites her tongue. As day turns to night, Leif and his men use a paddleboard to stealth their way upstream. After making short work of the guardhouse, they switch to rowing boats and press on. With tarps covering the men and women on board, the soldiers press on to the bridge. At the same time, Canute and the other Vikings bide their time and prepare to strike. And as night turns to day, the Vikings ready themselves. Some are on their longboats, led by Olaf, while Canute rallies the ground troops. Canute marches up on the Englishmen and enacts a parley, complete with a white flag. This is all a ruse though to bring out the soldiers en masse to the drawbridge. Unbeknownst to them, Leif and his men happen to be hacking away at the foundations. With Striona bound to arrive at any moment, Canute decides to antagonize Edmund by calling him King Belioa, which means coward, and knowing exactly how to get under his skin. And it works a treat. Emma and Godwin both do their best to try and stop him, but Edmund ignores them and decides to lead his men into battle without Mercia reinforcements. While Emma watches on the rooftops, the Vikings decide to retreat as their men are attacked and killed on the bridge. Canute leads his men back, Edmund falls for the bait and leads his men forward. Emma senses that this whole attack is a trap and readies the archers to attack the longboats. It's too late though, as Leif's plan goes into action. He uses archers, attached with ropes, to hit their shields and allow them to row away and break the foundations of the bridge. With the foundations snapping, Leif helps out by hacking away with his axe to help speed this along. Godwin rides out to meet Striona, informing him that Edmund has taken the fight to the Vikings. Next, he rides up to Edmund and tells him about the plan, but of course the Viking force is far stronger than Edmund was led to believe. Numerous men and women appear from the marshes and taunt King Edmund. This time, they take the fight to the Englishmen, while Edmund cowers in fear, trying to make it back to the castle. The foundations eventually topple, as does the whole bridge, leaving Edmund stranded and outside the castle. The Vikings cheer in victory, while Leif is the only surviving Greenlander from under the bridge. Upon seeing the destroyed bridge and how frail the Englishmen are, Striona decides to hold back and not attack after all, believing there's a greater battle to be won. So naturally, they decide to head back to Mercia, while Canute ends up with Edmund in his grasp. Emma remains behind her high walls as the Vikings cheer for Episode 5 of Vikings Valhalla begins in Uppsala with Freydis arriving for her pilgrimage. She's brought inside a temple where she learns more about the gods. She's also there to learn her destiny too. Freydis goes on her spiritual journey, where she finds a seer who promises that if she keeps running, then the cries will only grow louder. After this cryptic message, the seer turns into a crow and flies away. Meanwhile in England, the women in Emma's council pray as she sits on the throne and braces herself for the Vikings. When they all burst in, Emma demands to talk to Canute. Instead, she gets Olaf and his bloodthirsty men instead. Just before Edmund meets a nasty fate at the hands of Harold, Canute suddenly interjects and stops the beheading. He promises that if the sword strikes, so too will his against Harold. Understandably he's livid, and Harold slams his sword down in frustration and takes off. As Leif tends to the injured Liv, helping to take an arrowhead out of her shoulder, Canute applauds Edmund's brilliant battle tactics. And not in a sarcastic way either. If Mercia had attacked, the Vikings may well have been defeated. As it happens, it's Edmund's foolhardy, emotionally charged attack that let him down. Canute though is interested in Emma and quizzes Edmund for more details about her. Naturally, Canute decides to make a deal with Harold, deciding to try and make him king of Norway. The thing is, Olaf has already decided that his 12-year-old son is going to take the throne, a boy he's hidden from Harold, under the pretense that Harold would be granted the throne in due time. Canute soon rides to Mercia and thanks Striona for not interjecting. They decide to organize a dinner, but also to discuss what Striona's terms are for not attacking him. This certainly rattles Harold, and as he learns about Emma's riches, he realizes this is where he can find Olaf. Harold shows up at Emma's chambers and leads her out, straight to dinner with Canute and the others. Olaf isn't exactly happy she's there, while tribute is paid to Leif for his part to play in all this. He also manages to repay Freydis's debts too. Striona eventually speaks up and decides he wants to rule England in Canute's absence, believing he'll be heading back to Denmark soon. However, everything takes an awkward turn when Canute trusts that there's a traitor amongst them. And that traitor? Striona. Canute is going to be the next king of England and rule alongside Edmund. Edmund's job will simply be to keep the nobles in check, while Canute will extend his rule. After the meeting, Leif makes a bold decision and chooses to stick around after all and not head back to Greenland. There's nothing there for him anymore, and with Freydis on a spiritual journey of her own, he's going to stay with the Vikings. Meanwhile, Canute manages to bring Emma's children back to her, allowing them to be reunited and showing his kind side. In the hallway, Godwin offers up his services to Canute as he continues to flirt both sides of the conflict. Elsewhere, the pagan hunter follows the trail of blood all the way to the healer's hut. With her babe in hand, he admits there are 2 trails of blood and demands she speak the truth. Unfortunately, a slight shake of the head given her baby's life is on the line is enough for her to give up Yrsa. Unfortunately, the other horse riders surround the healer outside, while screams pierce the air. Freydis somehow senses this and hurries off on horseback to catch up. Will she make it in time? Episode 6 of Vikings Valhalla begins with Freydis returning to the healer's hut. Yrsa is dead, hung from the ceiling by the hunters. Freydis is livid and finds the man outside, sitting around a circle of severed heads. The thing is, she walks right into an ambush as numerous riders surround her. Brandishing a sword from Uppsala, we're introduced to Jarl Care properly, who stops his troops as he mentions the old one. It seems he knows of the visions Freydis has been experiencing while in Uppsala. He has her send a message to Håkon, Jarl Care is coming. As he turns and rides away, it seems Freydis will get to live another day. So just as commanded, Freydis returns to Kattegat and warns Håkon about Care. In doing so, Kattegat decides to make her one of her shield maidens. As Freydis trains, she learns that her true title is the last daughter of Uppsala. This explains her vision, as Håkon confirms she's had a vision of her own too, one person surviving a wave. Håkon originally thought it may have been her, but now it seems it's actually Freydis whom the vision is referencing. In London, half the Viking force prepare to sail back to their respective countries. Among those is Leif, who leaves with Harold. Canute stays and sets Godwin to work building a gallows. He has 11 reasons for doing so, and they're marched out in chains the following day. With their lives on the line, all the different nobles decide to pledge their allegiance to Canute, including Sineherd, who happens to be the noble that fled from Kent earlier in the season. Canute wants to build a great empire that stretches across the north of Europe, but in order to do that, he needs the riches of England. Emma wants a new tax, a simple levy on every single household. That's more than enough to build an empire, and it would also quell the stifling tax currently in place. Horns blow as Leif and the rest of the Vikings return to the shores. Whilst there, Harold asks for Håkon's support. Freydis also decides to stay in Kattegat on a new mission to protect the town. When she catches up with Harold, he admits he's heard of Care and his bloodthirsty crusade. He tells her that, if innocents have died, then Care needs to be punished, and balances that argument by claiming all religions have issues. Care heads to the temple in Uppsala, and specifically to the seer, where he remains determined to see the truth. After experiencing another vision, courtesy of the seer, Care heads to the front gates of Uppsala and opens them up, revealing his legion of followers. Olaf heads back to Denmark, where the Queen isn't exactly pleased about Canute staying in England. Of course, Olaf does his part to stir things up, going on to tell her he needs her support to help rule over Norway. The thing is, Canute and Emma have stated growing closer, and Godwin is unable to head into their chambers later that evening, with guards stationed at the doors. Godwin half suggests a coup and relays that on to Edmund. For now, they're to bide their time and wait for an opening, determined to see if this materializes itself. Canute receives a letter from Denmark and prepares his ship to head back. However, before he does, he turns to Emma and asks her a question as we fade to Episode 7 of Vikings Valhalla starts with Harold confessing his love to Freydis. Harold even intends to give up his title of King of Norway for her. However, over in Kattegat, horns blow as a ship approaches. It's an ominous scene, with severed heads on pikes, a baby crying and a woman nailed to the mast like a cross. This is a warning from Care and his people. When Håkon sees this, she prepares to beef up the defenses while Freydis cradles the child. She rides with the other shield maidens to Uppsala, where the place is an absolute massacre. The temple has been burnt while both Leif and Harold believe these hunters are purging the land. They find a group of kids cowering in a hole. It turns out they've been kept alive to pass a message on to Freydis. Care will kill her. Well, not unless Freydis kills him first. Elsewhere, Canute travels back to Denmark, which leaves England open for an opportunity for Edmund. Only his plan immediately falls apart when he learns Canute is married Emma, and Canute's father, King Sweyn Forkbeard, is taking his place on the throne in his absence. Forkbeard's first court is a disaster, and it's enough for Godwin and Edmund to begin conspiring together. That's something that's only made more appealing as Godwin is made the new Jarl of Wessex after killing the current noble in charge. Godwin and Edmund meet with the nobles in secret and strike a pact to support Edmund rather than the Viking kings. With them all pledging their allegiance, both Edmund and Godwin ride back, but walk right into a trap. A trap placed by Godwin, including a tripwire that Edmund falls off. Godwin chooses to keep his pledge to Canute and the Vikings, killing Edmund. The other nobles believe this is an act of God, but the truth is, of course, hidden from view. Emma checks the body later on and realizes this is a coup. That night, he arrives to see Emma, who challenges what happened. The thing is, Forkbeard brushes it aside and reminds her that only one king can rule. However, the Queen of Denmark, Ulfgifu, shows up with her fleet hiding just out of reach. She challenges Forkbeard and even threatens to switch the fleet and allow them to travel under Olaf's flag if she doesn't get her way. She controls a pretty powerful naval fleet, and that means the future of Norway is hanging in the balance. If Olaf takes Norway, then the entire north is threatened. Emma decides to repay the trust gained by Canute, given he saved her children from Olaf, and teams up with Forkbeard to try and find the fleet. Godwin knows how to play this game and advises Ulfgifu accordingly. Meanwhile, Olaf rides to seek heir, deciding to strike up a loose alliance. He has a price for this though. Care wants a great church in Kattegat, with a spire that reaches heaven. Care also boasts of his exploits to Olaf, including how he's burned down Uppsala. With Olaf lusting for power, they pair join forces. As they toast, Leif and Liv watch from the hilltops and realize this is bad news. The pair ride back to Kattegat and warn them that Care and Olaf have joined together. This poses a particularly bad omen on Kattegat, with Harald now having to fight against his own brother. Unfortunately, they have no idea how vast the empire is or how many troops they command together. As dawn breaks, Harald rides out and meets Olaf, who chuckles and claims the prodigal brother has returned. The final episode of the first season leaps into action as, due to Queen Ulfgifu's threats, King Sweyn banishes Emma to Normandy. Harald calls Care the murderer of innocents. And despite having sent Emma away, Queen Ulfgifu still does not tell King Sweyn where the fleets are. Aware of the tension, Godwin advises Queen Ulfgifu to prove that she can add value. Olaf informs Harald that Care is obsessed with Freydis and is likely to not rest until she is dead. The conversation turns to Harald's betrayal, which Harald defends by claiming Olaf was too violent. Regardless, Harald claims that he is here now, and he makes the decision to fight with his brother. In a group meeting that clearly won't restore peace, Freydis comes, once again, face to face with Care. Harald claims he seeks peace, whilst Olaf offers salvation if they all renounce their pagan past. In return, Håkon reveals her people do not fear death, and they would rather die with honor than renounce their past. Harald tries to persuade Leif, but both Leif and Freydis turn their backs on Harald. After Queen Ulfgifu gains an agreement with Mercia, Godwin congratulates her on doing something that Emma couldn't achieve. Shortly afterwards, it appears it could be the beginning of the end. The beacon gets lit, and everyone prepares. The battle begins. Care turns on Harald and tells him that he will return with Freydis's head as a memento. Meanwhile, Leif realizes that there are no armies on the ships, therefore it's a trick. Olaf saves Harald from Care's men and reveals he was using not only Care, but also Harald to split Kattegat's forces. In the brutal battle, Care wants to kill them all. His archers critically injure Håkon, allowing Care to climb the wall as the door gets broken down. Harald is injured and nearly killed after he gets attacked with an axe. Care finds Freydis, and although he nearly kills her, she gains the upper hand and finally chops off his head. Liv gets stabbed by Olaf, and as she lays dying, she tries to have Leif tell her that he will join her in Valhalla. Ultimately, she dies before she can hear him promise her that he will. Just as it appears that Freydis leaves Harald behind to die, she comes to his aid. With the battle over, Olaf storms into the hall. Kattegat is now his. And Olaf is the king of Norway. Queen Ulfgifu brings news of Mercia to King Sweyn. Except she learns that Emma is back on the throne. It becomes clear that Emma's departure was a charade. Godwin betrayed Queen Ulfgifu, and King Sweyn used her trip to Mercia to learn the location of her fleets. As he sails across the sea with his grandchildren, King Sweyn says to never let traitors go unpunished. Olaf learns that ships are heading his way, aka King Sweyn. Olaf's men abandon him, and with little choice, Olaf flees soon afterwards. In the aftermath, and after Leif kills men who attempt to rape women, one of King Sweyn's grandchildren finds Leif shirtless and covered in blood. The season finale ends as Leif roars. What did you think of Netflix's Vikings Valhalla Season 1 and the ending? Don't forget to share your thoughts in comments box.